So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the important time. I think we've been excellently served. I hope you'll agree with brilliant experts, fantastic insights. I don't know about you, but I've learned a huge amount. So let's quiz them in more detail. I'll take questions. If I could be told if there are online questions, then please somebody indicate somebody with a laptop. But I'll take the first question here for those from those present. And can I ask, please, be as brief as you can with your questions so that we can get maximum input from our experts. You can make a comment, but please avoid it if you can, and be as brief as you can. I'd be very grateful. Yes, go ahead. Microphone.
My name is Franca. I'm the director of Social Inclusion Limited, Nigerian Limited. My question goes to Professor Dauda. I can understand he's talking about Russian war, the effect of Russian war in Nigeria. How does it affect the South-South? Is he talking about the South-South or South-South Nigeria? Because I know the problem in South-South Nigeria is terrorism caused by Fulani herdsmen. So when he's talking about what has Russia got to do with terrorism in Nigeria, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for introducing yourself, which is something I should have mentioned. You've done it brilliantly. Your name, your affiliation, and who your question is directed to, either the panel in general or in this case to Dr. Dauda. Professor Dauda. Professor Dauda, I think I know the answer to this one, but you go ahead and give it if you can, please.
Thank you very much for that question. When I talk about South-South, I'm not referring to South-South Nigeria. I'm talking in terms of South, developing South-South. The world is divided into two. We have the developed North and the developing South. South-South is not the geopolitical region within the Nigerian state, but South-South within the context of third world countries, in the context of developing countries. And when I said how Russia-Ukrainian war can foil terrorism in Nigeria, what I said is that once people are hungry, they cannot feed themselves. Once there is high inflation, once people are out of jobs because of this crisis, they easily become recruits in the hands of terrorists, and they can easily take up arms against against the state. So once agriculture is affected, once people cannot be fed, once there's unemployment, once there is general dissatisfaction with the economy, people can easily be recruited to join terrorist group. So South-South is not in the context of South-South geopolitical zone in Nigeria, but South-South in terms of cooperation among the developing countries of the South. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I understand. So we have to look inwards, not to Russia, because Russia has nothing to do with the undevelopment in Nigeria and the crisis, terrorism crisis in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Yes, I think that was, again, a very good question. I think that Dr. Dowd also mentioned that this has resulted in South-South cooperation in Africa and elsewhere to become less dependent on the developed world. That's the other point he made, which has been made by others as well. Next question, I think we'll go online if there's a question online. No? Good, good. I think it's Alex. Would you like to go for next? Thank you.
Hi, Alex McGregor. I work as an analyst for S&P Global. Thank you. Very insightful points made by all the speakers. If we accept that international relations is all about interests and protecting them rather than morals and doing the right thing, surely even in that case, there must be some concern among some global South countries if President Putin's regime is seen to benefit from its war on Ukraine. I'm thinking in particular of weakening of international norms such as respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity and non-aggression. Because, I mean, obviously there are plenty of countries within the global South with bigger, badder neighbours and with boundary disputes. And if these international norms are weakened, surely they could, in the future, find themselves victims in the same way as Ukraine is right now.
Okay, so that's a question to the panel in general, I take it.
Just to anyone who wants to take it.
Would you like to take this one? Can I just summarize that question in that I think the question is Russia going against international norms here, and would it be wise in the long term to support Russia? Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. When you talk about this kind of conflict, yes, in a normal situation, morality should have been at the forefront of people's actions and decisions. But think about the situation that the Global South, not all the Global South, but some countries majorly, are hamstrung. There are international laws, sovereignty, respect for people's sovereignty, that played out when Iraq invaded Kuwait, right? There was a unified approach to getting Iraq out of Kuwait and respecting Kuwait's sovereignty. But this particular conflict is different. But it does not mean that morality should play a second fiddle. International laws and norms ought to be respected. But the nature of this conflict makes it difficult for people to feel free to say where they stand openly. It does not mean that by not going with the West headlong, they are saying, okay, it is fine. No. What is wrong is wrong. What is right is right. This conflict should not have started in the first place. Ukraine has right to her sovereignty. Russia is not supposed to invade Ukraine or make war on them. But we are talking about perspectives of the Global South. It is almost different, but not completely different from the issues of morality. They are still free to say, oh, this war is not good, but why can't we find somehow, another way of resolving it? Rather than saying, sanction them, make sure they don't succeed, this and that. Because some of the countries have historical alliances. Some countries in East of Africa, for instance, has military ties. They cannot come out to say, hey, we support the sanction, we support, all the punishment that is going to Russia as a result of this conflict. So my summary is this. Morality is still there. Everybody is aware of the implication of this war. But when people are sitting on a tight corner, there is not much they can do because most African countries are weak in every respect, politically, economically, So that is why they cannot freely express themselves. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now, the remaining panel does not have to answer this question, but is there anybody online from the panelists who wants to add to that answer or take away from it, if you disagree? I see no hands. Thank you. Professor Dowda, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to say something. From the perspective of South-South, it is very unfortunate that South-South has always looked to Europe for the moral high grounds as a standard bearer in terms of respect for human rights, respect for sovereignty of states, respect for one another, and respect for peaceful coexistence. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia has really created somehow a moral deficit, even though you can say that international relations is not conducted on moral high planes. But I agree with the ambassador that there are some moral high grounds like respect for the sovereignty of the states, that you cannot use war just because you are strong to attack your neighbor. That thing should not happen in the 21st century. Thank you.
Honorable Mr. Siddiqui, did you want to say something?
Yes,
Yes, go ahead.
yes, of course, of course. Sir, morality can be a complex and subjective approach topic, and its role in addressing the various issues can vary depending on the context. Morality can guide individuals and societies in making ethical decisions. It will not always provide a comprehensive solution to complex problems. In many cases, resolving issues require a multi-phased approach that involves considering various factors such as legal framework, socio-economic condition, political considerations, and the well-being of all affected parties. Solutions often require a balance between different perspectives and practical consideration. While morality can certainly inform our choices and actions, it may not be the sole determinant in finding solution to complex problems. It is important to consider a range of factors and approaches while tackling issues and to promote dialogue, empathy, and understanding among all stakeholders involved. Sir.
Thank you very much. I think that was, I hope, answered your question to some degree, at least. Some very good answers there. And it's a very key question. And there were a few things that I didn't hear. I heard an answer to the implied question there, which was, are you not afraid of the other side? I don't think fear works anymore. That's an important takeaway, which was implied in all of those answers. The second thing, I think, that hasn't really been voiced directly, but I have heard in recent visits to the Global South, and that is that international norms should be universally applied, and they're not. It isn't Russia that's invaded and bombed many countries, whereas there have been less than legal invasions and regime changes that have gone horribly wrong. So I think that's a perspective that, because of brevity, our excellent speakers didn't add, but certainly I've heard. I have a question here online from Mr. Haroon Rafiq, and he says, how does cultural diplomacy stand up to freedom of expression? I'm thinking of recent events in Sweden. I wonder if, Dr. Mark, you're able to take this question on.
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that. And first of all, of course, one has to begin by saying cultural diplomacy can be completely different in different countries and different places. There are some parts of the world you can't do cultural diplomacy. There are some parts of the world where cultural diplomacy is thought to be against the government. It's just like civil society. Civil society in the American framework is looked upon as a partner of public society. In some African countries and also other countries in the world, it's assumed you're either with the government or you're with civil society. So I can't answer your question in a general way, but of course, there are many opportunities where cultural diplomacy can help to stand up to freedom of expression. I'll give you one example. I have a lecture actually where I try to argue that the Arab Spring, a part of the reason it was such a surprise for the world is because everyone was doing cultural diplomacy wrong. And I talk about the classical example, cultural diplomacy of speaking, as opposed to a cultural diplomacy of listening. If you think about cultural diplomacy of the past, it was always about speaking. If I'm French, I want to tell you about France. I want to show you French music and French movies. If I'm Italian, I want to bring you the Italian language and show you Italian culture, which is fine. But if you think about it, if the goal is building trust, much more important than speaking is actually listening. As the foreign minister of Mozambique one told me, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. We have to do twice as much listening as a diplomat. And I think it's very important. So to your question, How can we support freedom of expression if during the Arab Spring, instead of American governments sending Facebook messages and posting on Facebook pages, if they had been reading Facebook pages in Egypt, in Tunisia, etc., they would have gotten many more insights as to what was really going on. The same with Twitter. Instead of just tweeting what the German diplomat had for breakfast in the morning, if he had been reading tweets from Egypt, from Tunisia, he would have had also many insights. Can we believe everything we see on the social media? No. Can we believe everything on the official media? Also no. So the idea, get as many perspectives as you can. Instead of bringing Western music to Egypt and Tunisia, what if we had been listening to some of the hip hop and rap music of Tunisian rappers and Arab rappers? Many of the themes of the Arab Spring were present in a lot of music at the time, but most of the world wasn't listening to that. Instead of sending Hollywood movies around the world, what if we were looking at Egyptian movies? I can give you many examples. Or looking at Tunisian films, again, to get insights, putting our ears to the streets. So that's just one example how I think cultural diplomacy can give voices to some voices sometimes not heard. You have to make sure it's a two-way street. And by having a cultural diplomacy based more on listening than on speaking, that can help, as you said, give the voices to those voices aren't heard, help with freedom of expression. And just as a final point, you can see in times of oppression, sometimes artists can get very creative. There's a famous Egyptian graffiti artist, Gandhif is his name. He used to traditionally do graffiti on walls, but then it got quite difficult in the late Mubarak years to do that. Heavy military presence everywhere, heavy police presence. So instead of giving up, he started to make t-shirts, and he continued his artwork on t-shirts. And many of the protesters on Tahrir Square were also wearing his t-shirts. So that's just another lesson learned. Cultural diplomacy, you have to improvise. Sometimes times are difficult, but I think a lot can be done. So to answer your question, yes, it can help to stand up for freedom of expression, but it's case by case different in each country.
So the other three panelists don't have to answer this question, but if there is a burning issue, the question, just for a reminder's sake, was how does cultural diplomacy stand up to freedom of expression?
I would like to respond,
I'm thinking of recent events in Sweden. Harun Haq. Sorry, who was that?
Sir,
Go ahead.
sir, it's very clear. Sir, I'm sorry, sir. Who is there?
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, cultural diplomacy and freedom of expression are interconnected concepts that played a significant role in promoting mutual understanding, tolerance, and mutual relations between nation and cultures. Cultural diplomacy refers to the use of cultural exchanges, arts and cultural activities, and a mean of foster dialogues, building bridges, and enhance people-to-people connection between different societies. It recognizes the power of cultural expressions in promoting understanding and appreciation to diverse perspective, values, and traditions. However, it is important to strike a balance between freedom of expression and the responsibility to respect the right and dignity of the others. While freedom of expression should be protected, it should not be used to incite violence, promote hate speech, or infringe upon the rights of the others. Overall, cultural diplomacy and freedom of expression can work hand in hand to promote cultural understanding, encourage dialogues to a more inclusion and peaceful global community. And at the end, a great saying of our holy prophet, your right of liberty end where the start, and the laws of defamation and as far as hate speeches are concerned, that's are already holding the field, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think those were excellent answers. What we're getting here, what I'm hearing, I think, is that in order for cultural diplomacy to take place, which Dr. Mark explained very carefully, is to build trust. What I think we're hearing is that culture is part of an individual or a collective people's identity. And you cannot build trust with people that you do not respect or show respect to. So if your freedom of speech disrespects the other's culture aggressively, then you are not going to be able to achieve the objectives of cultural diplomacy. Certainly that's what I've taken away from that rich answer that we've received. Do we have any other questions? Yes, please go ahead. You got the microphone here? Who's got the mic? Sorry, I do beg your pardon. I did say you will have the next. I forgot that I was offering the opportunity to use.
Thank you very much. My name is Peter Olorishamo. I'm a writer, a consultant, and editor of the Principal News. My question is this: would it be right to view the complicity of the South-South, rolled in complicity of the South-South, by the top nations who are there, particularly in this war, when it appears that the principle of neoliberalism is being threatened by the aggregation of countries to the South-South? For example, Africa. You're finding in Africa that there's regional solidarity now on a much stronger level. So much so that Africa is looking at a certain position by 2050, 2056 or something like that. I mean, right now. And yet, we notice that all this is happening just at the time when the world power shift is itself experiencing turbulence. Instead of the usual thing, which the usual thing expected is the big countries muzzle up, and then they would have just swept everybody aside, which would have happened with COVID, but it didn't happen. So could this be part of the situation?
So is there anybody in particular you'd like to address this question
or it's open to any of them.
So Ambassador, I think you were being looked at, certainly during that question. I'm sure you could start the answers.
Thank you very much. You know, the one thing you view as permanent in life is changed. You know, change is a permanent future because of the dynamic nature of human. Over these generations, Africa has always toed the line of the colonial masters. Then today, there is a soul searching among the global South as to whether this approach has served their interest well. So that is why today you see African countries deciding to come together to forge a new front. And this particular move is, anchored by the African Union. Today you have the African Center for Disease Control trying to make new pathways for African health sector, for instance. And that is how it is also coming in other areas of life. So as much as the Global South wants to forge their true independence or less dependence from on the West, it is still not guaranteed that they will succeed, but there is no harm in trial, if I put it that way. So what is happening now should not surprise you, but it is only a matter of time before we know where it is going to lead the Global South. But the good news about it is that the Global South feels for once that they can actually take their own destiny in their own hands and remain less dependent on the West. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got, and I direct my comments to the panelists, we've got 3 questions, and we've only got 9 minutes. So can I ask the questioners to be very brief, and can I ask the answers to be as brief as possible? I know it's difficult, but please do so.
Hilda Rapp, Centre for International Peacebuilding. I was quite happy to cede my question because actually you asked it in a way. The question is really to do about the new narrative that's coming out of the Global South that I feel you've all tapped into, saying there is a new story being told which is not from Western ideological principles. And if you could say a little bit more about the importance of that for everybody in the world, I would be grateful. Thank you.
Is that question to anybody in particular?
Anybody who wants to answer it. I think
Okay.
it's to all of you, because you've all tapped into this question.
So could I ask somebody online first if they wanted to say anything to that question? Otherwise, I'm sure the ambassador will chip in here. Okay, it's yours.
So in changing the narrative, it's taking a risk, because success is not guaranteed. But the first moves has to take place. So if there is a failure, they learn from the mistakes and they try again. So the point here is this: the Global South are learning from history and the present happenings globally, and they want to, use it as a pedestal to chart their own course. Thank you.
I think next one is Sheikh Ramsey.
God bless you all. Just before I say anything, you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May peace and blessing of Almighty God be upon you all. I'm sorry, my apology. We were in the House of Parliament for the very serious business, but of course it take a long time. I would have come earlier. I have a question for the Dr. Afzal and Dr. Mark Stanford. Mark, good evening to you. Pleasure. Are you see me? One thing is very straightforward. I've been very involved with the war in Russia and of course Ukraine for the fundraising or for the many talk about in the cathedral. Cathedral, of course, we have a very big cathedral for the Ukrainian cathedral, which I'm involved to talk, to pray, to do many things for the refugees. However, one question I've got for both of you, nobody else's. Are we going to the nuclear?
My answer to that question is very likely, unless this war is resolved peacefully. I've written on it, if you want to read about it, it's a complex issue. I've written on it in the conversation, so you Google my name and conversation. And my worry is that all the nuclear logic and thinking is out of date, because until recently, it was the West that chose the first option. And it chose it because it was the weaker of the two sides in the Cold War. And it said that if there was a war, we would be first to go nuclear. The situation is reversed. And President Putin has made it absolutely clear that he will go nuclear first. And I don't think this is understood. Totally off the record, I hope he's not listening, but our current Minister of Defense has made statements which tell me that he doesn't understand nuclear logic. And that is primarily the reason why this war must be resolved without a defeat. Anyway, Mark, over to you. Dr. Mark.
I like to stay optimistic. However, of course, I have very grave concerns, as you do, that if it keeps escalating, it could very easily shift to become nuclear. If I look at the indications that I've seen here from Germany, however, I see Europe is in many ways preparing for a long war. There's a major company in Germany, Rheinmetall, and they're building now a factory in the Ukraine to build tanks. It'll only be finished in 2 years. Just as one example where I think Europe in many ways is planning for a long road war. I think I like to be optimistic and think that Putin realizes if he were to push that button, it would really just result in disaster for everyone. So again, I share your concern. I look a little bit more optimistically as I see the development there in terms of really many indications showing plans for a long-term war. So yes, I think that means many Ukrainians will die, many Russians will die, but hopefully we can stay optimistic that it wouldn't go nuclear. But anyone's guess.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm afraid we only have time for one more question, and this question is coming online from Mr. Harun Rashid again. He wants to be on camera this time, so we'll get to see him. And if he can very quickly ask his question as briefly as possible, Mr. Rashid, you've got twice as many questions as anybody else. Go ahead.
Okay, so I have posted some questions on the group chat, but one of the questions I had, obviously with the social media, these are profit-making businesses, and the whole idea of Facebook and Twitter and TikTok is basically to push, populism, the sort of dramatize everything, and And when you're trying to sort of calm things down, Doctor, with cultural exchanges, and Facebook is working against you, they won't sell any ads if they don't push all the the sort of extreme stuff, whether it's left wing or right wing. So that's the first thing. And when you speak about nuclear bombs, and we've got this issue of cluster bombs, which I think in Laos there's something like 15 million unexploded cluster bombs there, and every single nation in the world, bar US, has removed all storage of cluster bombs. So the main questions, I think the social media, it makes it extremely hard for all this cultural exchange to work when it doesn't sell any business. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. Who would like to take that question? Yes, go ahead.
A very simple answer to this question, if you allow me. Yeah. As far as the right of speech is concerned, it's not a universal or a fundamental right. It contains certain restrictions. And these are the common examples. Hate speech, defamation, obscenity, and speech that directly threatens national security. And in my opinion, as far as UN resolution on the subject with reference to combating religions are concerned, that are very much available, and it's a high time to enforce it in its real time, sir.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that's partly addressed the question.
Just a very short question?
Okay, one last very short question.
Very quick. Obviously, we're on the news right now. There's a lot of involvement about what's happening in Western Russia with the Ukraine war. But do you think that there will be some large involvement with Russia expanding south and west towards Alaska and obviously towards the old Soviet states at all? Do you think there's any chances of that?
That's a very interesting question. Is there anybody you want that question directed to? Because it's not really a global south issue.
Yes.
But is there anybody who's got a burning answer to that? Okay, well, I think that's a tact. Okay, Martin, go ahead.
Just very briefly, I mean, if you ask that to many of my friends in Eastern Europe, definitely they are concerned that Russia will extend there. And so that's definitely a concern of Romanians, of Bulgarians, of Lithuanians, many of the Eastern Europeans that I've spoken to. So I think that's a very real fear from Eastern Europe.
Let me chip in there then to give you a counter to that. There are, in any war, narratives constructed. We used to call them propaganda. We don't do that anymore. There is a narrative very prevalent in the West that Putin is like Hitler. He wants to rule the world. Everything he's said and done, if you look at it dispassionately, it is to ensure his security from NATO encroachment. So a lot of people we all believe certain narratives. And a lot of Eastern Europe has been made to believe that they're being threatened. The reality is for us to individually decide. Ladies and gentlemen, the very fact that we have run out of time and we all could have asked more questions suggests that Robin and Margaret, in selecting this panel, has chosen some brilliant people. We have been feasting on some amazing insights, and on your behalf, I'd like to thank them all for sharing their knowledge, their wisdom with us. Thank you.